LawCall is provided in the public interest by Timberlake, League and Brooks, which pays an advertising fee to the station.
This is WAAY 31 Law Call.
Welcome to WAAY 31 Law Call. I'm Sharon Dovia. Tonight we're talking about child daycare safety. It's a very uncomfortable situation for any parent to send children, but especially young children, off to be in someone else's care. You pay a lot of money for good babysitters and good daycares. It's been in the news this week about a local daycare worker accused of betraying that trust in the worst way. And when it happens, what's the legal outcome of this? Luckily, reportedly there were cameras in this particular facility, but what if your daycare facility doesn't have cameras? How do you determine what actually happened when the primary witness is a child, and a young child? Who's going to believe the child? Do you as a parent have to wait until criminal charges have been brought, or criminal charges have already been, a criminal case tried before you can file your lawsuit? What are the proper steps? If you've got questions about it or a comment about it tonight, call in the 31 Law Call number, 256-536-0077. You can call and be live on the air, or you can text us at that same number and we'll be getting your text tonight. You can also email legal questions on any legal topic any day of the week. You send it to lawcall@waytv.com, and when we get to a show that's on point, we pull some out. We'll have some of your email questions tonight. We've got Will League and Heath Brooks, both from Timberlake, League and Brooks. Good to have you guys here.
All right,
what
Sharon.
a story in the news this week. Where do we even start with something like this? Parents very upset, and fortunately it sounds like there were cameras in the facility, but a lot of facilities don't.
Yeah, I guess we can all agree, children are most precious, right? Most to be protected the most, and we'll stop nothing to make sure they are protected. And every parent's worst nightmare to, think something's happened to their child while someone else's care. And, it's just a nightmare. And to look at, what do daycare centers, what do they have to comply with? What do they have to do? There's several different laws and factors. And Alabama Code Section 38-7 deals specifically with daycare centers. Now, most of them, unless you're exempt, and some of the exemptions could be a church-run facility for a non-profit basis. It's an integral part of the church facility, or it could be for-profit, and most of them are licensed through Department of Human Resources, DHR. And those set out minimum standards. So DHR sets out minimum standards that the facility must adhere to. They're designed purely to protect the children and make sure the staff not only enforces minimum standards. DHR can go in and inspect those facilities. They can investigate complaints, impose sanctions, revoke or deny a future license. And so there are standards that clearly come in to protect these children. And part of that is background checks, whether it be criminal registry, criminal history, prior issues of that facility. And there are definitions that who can be a daycare teacher, someone with suitable character and, with temperament and all the things that we, the law is pretty clear and no nonsense about, we need the best folks taking care of our children. And part of the vetting process falls on the church, the staff, the daycare center, who's running that operation. And it's, abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, those are foreseeable risks. And if you allow anyone without proper access, that is something that creates an unreasonable danger to the children in that facility. And there are safeguards in place to protect the children, to protect the staff and give them guidance. And so anytime something like this happens, it's a nightmare. The laws have to be looked at. Procedures have to be looked at. The licensure has to be looked at. What are their prior? What did they know? When did they know it? What could have been done to prevent that? And daycares are one thing, but school buses, school liability, field trip liability. Heath, what does that entail?
Whenever you are going to take charge of somebody's child, whenever you're an institution, whether that's a daycare center, whether that's a public school, whether that's a private school, any time you're going to take care of somebody else's child, you have some certain responsibilities. We deal a lot with situations where school buses get in accidents, whether that's going from young children on a school bus to all the way up to high school. And what happens in that kind of scenario generally speaking, when you're talking about public schools and you're talking about school boards, they have a get out of jail free card. If a school board messes up, then under state law, we don't have the ability to bring an action against the school board. But generally, when you look at the individual bus driver, there can be a situation where the bus driver could be responsible to the students. And then also, if somebody else caused a wreck, if somebody else that ran a stop sign and hit a school bus or caused an injury, we've seen those kinds of scenarios. So you can have responsibility for the bus driver, you can have responsibility for somebody else that wasn't taken care in that kind of scenario. But when you're dealing with daycare centers, there's a lot of stringent regulations that have to be followed to ensure that the people that are taking care of our most precious assets are taken care of.
That's right. And one of those is the ratio of student to teacher, and what qualifies as a teacher, what qualifies as a student. But basically, the little ones need the most care. The infants is 1 to 5, 1 teacher per 5 kids. You go up to 2-year-olds, it's 1 to 7, and over that, 1 to 11. And we've all heard, on the news, or you see where this particular facility left a child in a van. And so, when you're transporting children, as he talked about on the bus cases, there needs to be the staff ratio that's there. You got 1 driving, you got 1 looking after the kids. Let's get a good head count before we leave. In the summertime in the South, we see it all too often where a child is left in a car. And let's be honest, as parents, we try and interview the facility. And so the advice that we give parents is make sure to sit down with the staff, sit down with the administrator, see if they're DHR compliant, see if they have internal policy and procedures that comply with not only state law but DHR's regulations. And you want to make sure that they're good folks, the best you can. And parents do their best to vet, interview, and make sure there are cameras. Can you have access to those cameras? What access do you have to your child during this facility? Now, when we're talking about daycare, we're talking about oftentimes kids that are too young,
that's right,
to articulate what's going on.
That's right.
And so that's why cameras and staff compliance with those minimum standards are just a requirement.
How unusual is it for a facility to have cameras? Is it now just standard? All daycares have got cameras. Okay.
Most have cameras.
Okay.
I mean, for a lot of different reasons. One is you want to monitor the classroom.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that other kids aren't fighting or other kids aren't hurting each other or somebody's not choking or something like that. There's a problem in the classroom. Has nothing to do with any other human.
Right.
But also, you got people that come into a school and try to take a child away. I mean, there's a lot of reasons for you to have cameras in the schools, and we have that as a resource. So that's something that we utilize. But back to one of Will's points, and this is something that we do, talk to parents about, is that you want to ask the administrator, hey, what kind of training do you have? What kind of training does your employees have? If you have a trained teacher in a daycare center, that's a lot different than if you have a 16-year-old that's watching kids. That doesn't go towards your count. That doesn't go towards your child count. So what kind of training do your teachers have? What have you done to ensure that they've complied with all the regulations that are required by the Department of Human Resources? I think about it, I coach kids soccer. Will and I both coach kids soccer, and we have to go through a lot of training just to be able to identify problems kids may have if they're being assaulted in other areas, and we're first reporters. Have your teachers gone through that kind of training to ensure that your kids are safe?
Yeah. We've got callers waiting with questions or comments. Clark's on the line with a question or comment from Huntsville. Hi, Clark. Thanks for calling. And we're going to try and keep any kind of names out or any facilities names out, but let's see if we can offer you some direction. What's your question tonight?
Well, obviously, we know what the latest issue was with the church. Now, this particular church, United Methodist Church, has Safe Sanctuary, which is supposed to be used up for everyone, even including volunteers. And apparently, the process broke down. So where's the liability? Is the liability in not having a process, or the liability in not enforcing the process?
Yeah, interesting. And are we talking criminal liability? Are we talking civil? Where do we go with
directly
this?
to his question, both. Okay, the state law requires, and DHR And the code section requires minimum standards if you're a licensed daycare center. Even if you're not licensed, you still have requirements. They're less so, reporting requirements, things like that. But again, back to the license. You have to have a policy procedure. If you do not have it, that creates liability. If you have it and don't follow it, that is also creates liability. Now, with regard to the teacher or a teacher that has assaulted anyone, okay? There's a couple of situations. One is criminal.
Okay.
All right, so you're charged criminally by the district attorney. District attorney represents the people, the state of Alabama, the citizens, against this person to preclude this and to punish this stuff, this type of conduct. And then there's a civil claim against that particular defendant. Now, unless to hold the staff accountable for a criminal liability, they have to have some type of intent, more than negligent or wantonness. Okay. So back to the caller's question, you have to have the policy procedures. If you don't, that's a problem. If you have them and you don't follow it, that's also a problem. In the policy procedures, they clearly outline the staff to student ratio with oversight. Okay. And so if there's an aide or something like that, that does not count in your student to teacher ratio, just like Heath pointed out. Right. And so there's cameras. They may have, there's nothing in the law that precludes them from having more stringent policy and procedures than what's required by Section 38(7) under Alabama Code. You can have, and that those policies are implemented and are failed to follow, why have them? And so that's something to talk about. If there was other policies outside the minimum standards set out by DHR and Alabama law, then those are something to look at as well. Now, holding criminal liability to a third party, they're going to have a pretty high mental, intention. Okay. To be held criminally liable if you're not the one actually assaulting the students. Now, if there was some sort of, assistance, that's something on the criminal side that could be looked at.
Yeah, I think too, when you're dealing with a daycare center that's not attached to a church, there's a lot of people would think that would be a different kind of scenario. But when you take money as a daycare center, as an organization, you are set up as a sanctuary church. But when you have a business that's a daycare center, then you are responsible if the conduct of one of your employees that you should have been watching out for causes a horrible scenario like this. So, there is some responsibility there potentially when your employee conducts themselves in a way that you knew or should have known they could.
On the criminal aspect, Heath, we got a text message. If child reports abuse and the parent assaults the perpetrator on the allegation, can the assault charges be dropped once the perpetrator is found guilty?
That's going to be up to the judge. And with the district attorney, normally, you two wrongs don't make a right. You got a perpetrator, I understand. Hey, look, I got children myself. You got a perpetrator, you want to, get them to stop. Maybe you assault them, and then the perpetrator's found guilty. And do you now, because you rightfully did something, do you get out of the crime? Well, if you're charged with a crime and you're charged with assault, then it would be up to the district attorney or the judge or a jury to find you guilty or not guilty. And so the answer to that is quite possibly, but yeah, that would depend upon a jury, a judge, or the district attorney. And
those charges, they won't go away just because the perpetrator is found guilty.
That's right.
And there's a system in place, and I understand the high emotions, but there's a system in place to prosecute this individual. And just like he said, just because he's found guilty, your assault on the perpetrator, that does not go away.
We see that from time to time. Somebody does something bad, they react, maybe rightfully so. They react, and then they're charged with a crime, and you let the system play it out.
There's a defense of self-defense. If you're not actively you may not use force unless it's reasonable to protect yourself or a third party.
That's true.
Of that force. So on the technical side of the law,
we understand.
Careful.
Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back because we've got a question about what if your child went to the same daycare? What do you do? We'll be right back.
LawCall is provided in the public interest by Timberlake, League & Brooks, which pays an advertising fee to the station.
You're watching WAAY 31 Law Call. Your rights, your calls, live. Presented by the Tennessee Valley's award-winning personal injury and wrongful death law firm, Timberlake, League & Brooks. featuring the knowledge and experience of attorney Michael Timberlake, attorney Will League, attorney Heath Brooks, attorney William Maservi, and hosted by broadcaster and family law attorney Sharon Doviet. This is WAAY 31 Law Call.
Welcome back to 31 Law Call. I'm Sharon Doviet. Tonight we're talking about child daycare safety, and we've got with us Will League and Heath Brooks from Timberlake League and Brooks. We're talking specifically, well, we're talking about laws related to daycares. There was a story in the news this week of a daycare worker being charged with harming a child, and there may be video of that because a lot of daycares, and this one has video cameras. So children can get hurt in other ways too at daycare. So if they're harmed by another child, a child pushes somebody down on the playground, is the daycare responsible for that too? Because we're trying to make a daycare responsible or possibly responsible for this event with a worker.
You know, I'll tell you, daycares, we were talking earlier about the fancy legal term for it is sovereign immunity when a school board can't be sued. But a daycare is a private organization. So the teachers have a responsibility to supervise students to ensure that they are safe. Now, the reality is that I fell when I was a kid and busted my chin wide open. You know,
Stuff happens.
That happens. But there is a scenario where a child gets injured, or gosh forbid, we've seen a scenario where the child gets away from the school.
Oh.
The daycare center loses the child.
Okay.
You know, and so if that happens, then a daycare center can be responsible if that child gets injured, or God forbid, badly injured, which can happen. Then the daycare center can be responsible for that because they failed in their responsibility to supervise those children.
Okay.
You know, we had a show about a month ago. Well, golly, a couple months ago. The young man Austin Borden who was injured over at the high school.
Right.
You know, nobody was charged. The staff wasn't charged. Teachers weren't charged. They ultimately decided, or the official opinion of the district attorney's office was that it was horseplay. I think the injured young man's best friend said it was horseplay, and so there was a lot of witness statements that came out that said it was horseplay. So if it's horseplay, kids being kids, nobody's liable, and that sort of thing. And even if kids get in a fight, okay, they're 8, 9, 10, are they criminally liable? Oftentimes not, unless there's more to it than that.
Right.
Okay.
They can be, and again, nobody wants their child to be bullied at school. Everybody's against that. And so if staff know about something and fail to act or take reasonable measures, now I understand you can't control all the other humans, but as staff members, as faculty, if you're on notice of a dangerous condition, whether it be bullying, whether it be the baseball field's not safe.
Right.
And you put those kids in a dangerous position, there could be some liability. Now, in schools, you have to go on if it's a public school, there are certain immunities that may apply, discretionary immunity and some other things that may apply, and you have to go down to a board to make that particular claim. But as he said, on daycares, that does not have sovereign immunity. Okay. They, under the DHR regulations, they have to have the policy procedures, they have to have insurance, they have to have things in place to hopefully keep these things from happening, and if they do happen, provide some sort of recourse to the children.
Same thing with playground equipment.
Okay.
You see that too. You gotta keep your playground equipment.
Okay.
You gotta make sure it's safe for kids too. So there's a lot of things that go into that, and nobody's perfect, obviously,
right.
but I mean, you just gotta make sure that stuff is safe for the 4 and 5 year olds.
And all this seems a little bit, hey, people watching at home, sometimes people call me, hey man, things happen. What's the big deal? And I get it. But Heath and I, we take calls every day. And when it happens to your child, I bet you'll be calling somebody. When it happens to your child, the hey, let's be cool kind of goes by the wayside. And so when a parent gets a call like this, it's from we just had a somebody text in and say, hey, what's the big deal? Things happen. Somebody's always not responsible. That could be true as well. But that particular stance, I understand it. But when I talk to people, when people come into our office, they say, Mr. League, let me just tell you, I'm not the suing kind. And I understand that. And nobody's the suing kind until your ox is in a ditch, until your family member or child has been harmed in some way. So I get it, the cool people out there, but thank goodness you can be cool and nothing's happened to your people. And if it does, then sometimes you have to go to once you decide you're not a murderer, you're left with the law. And so those are the channels that we have to go through, and we counsel our clients into what we can and can't do, and trying to keep them safe and let the process play out, because otherwise it's really bad.
So we got this email question from initials AB writing in, if your child attended the same daycare but wasn't in the video, would it still be possible to sue, knowing that they'd been under the same conditions and were in danger all that time? So who knows how many children may have been injured, and they're young. So how do you know if your child was acting funny or telling you something, that it's true or not true?
There's a lot that goes into that. I mean, sometimes you have to rely upon the child. Sometimes you have to get some further help. Get a forensic psychologist, child psychologist to talk to these children, because one of the things with this situation is that when you're 4 or you're 5 and something really bad like this happens to you, it doesn't oftentimes come forward until you're older. And so it's important to address, if you were in a potentially dangerous situation, to address that situation with somebody who has the expertise to be able to identify that problem with your child. Talk to the forensic child psychologist. They're out there. The resources are out there to help folks in this kind of scenario.
Would you tell people to even be talking to their child about this and asking them if they went to that daycare, or do you take them to an expert to even start the conversation?
We talk to the professionals about that. And, if the child's so young they don't remember, there's a balance between, do you bring something up to the child and take the chance of unearthing something that they may not know about? Or is it something that the child needs? If they try and talk about it, is it more healthy for the child to be able to express themselves? And so you really rely on the Children's Advocacy Center and the counselors and the professionals in that realm. A lot of parents struggle with, do I bring this up to my child? Do I let it lie? And oftentimes, according to the literature and the experts, if there's something that happens, sometimes it manifests itself later. And I have a lot of parents that are coming to me, well, my child started doing this or that. Is it just a natural child temper tantrum, or is it something deeper? And you want to do the best for your kids. You want to give them the best tools to succeed, the best support, the best thing, everything you can to try and help them. And I really just rely on the professionals, because that's a tough decision when you got a child who may be hurting, that might need that outlet, and the ones that may not remember. And so why
bring it up?
Alert them to
Yeah.
that? And that's a really tough question for parents.
Okay. Let's take a break. We'll be right back answering more of your questions about child daycare law.
LawCall is provided in the public interest by Timberlake, League and Brooks, which pays an advertising fee to the station.
Haven't gotten your questions answered tonight. Here's how to get in touch with Will League and Heath Brooks with Timberlake, League and Brooks in Huntsville, 256-536-0770 or 800-804-2502. The website is law-injury.com. And if you like them on Facebook, you can learn more about the law that way.
And Sharon does family law. That's divorce, child custody, and the like. She can be reached at 256-539-7337 or www.sharonfamilylaw.com.
You guys enjoyed the winter weather this week. What did you see?
What you don't see is my daughter a little bit to the right about to slide down that hill. and it was one slide. There's about probably 1/4 of an inch of snow on the hill. So she got one time down, and that was it. But it was a neat thing to see.
And you didn't drive in it, right?
No driving.
Thanks for all your calls and questions. Stay safe.
Have a good night.
We'll see you next week.